If you'd asked me last Christmas where I'd be this year, I'd have told you anywhere but here. Anywhere but pulling into my brother's frozen driveway at dusk, my fingers white-knuckled around the steering wheel, the echo of her voice in my head. "You're not welcome here, Elise. Not this year." Funny how power shifts when you don't flinch. My name is Elise Morgan. I'm 32 years old, child of an ordinary working-class English town that smells of wet leaves and old stone in the winter. I grew up believing family is the one thing you never have to buy back, until I learned some people love you best when they think you're beneath them. This year, the frost came early. The town looks like it's been dipped in glass. I'm sitting in my battered old Mini Cooper outside my brother Simon's semi-detached, staring at the house like it might reach up and swallow me whole. From the outside, it's everything they brag about. Twinkling reindeer in the front garden, fairy lights knotted along the drainpipe, the good wreath, thick, lush, overpriced. But inside, the smell of secrets is thicker than the mulled wine they pour. I'm here because I chose not to stay away. Because the house they boast about? The mortgage papers tucked in the kitchen drawer are mine. My name is on them. My money made this place theirs. And for the first time, I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter. Last year, when she said I wasn't welcome, I believed her. I drove to the seaside and ate fish and chips alone on a bench in the rain. I told myself it was freedom, but it felt like giving up. This year, I'm walking in. I kill the engine. The silence is a shock after the rumble of the road. I check my phone. No new messages from Simon. He's been spineless since the day he married her. Alana, the girl who wore white to my mother's funeral, and told people it was a hopeful color. I squeezed the small envelope in my coat pocket. Inside, a single sheet of paper. My trump card, if you want to call it that. Proof that some ties are signed in ink, not just blood. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for respect. And maybe, if I'm honest with myself, for an answer to the question that's been eating me for years. How did we get here? The cold hits me as soon as I step out. The air tastes like snow. I tug my coat tighter, push my shoulders back, and cross the garden, the crunch of gravel under my boots louder than the Christmas carols leaking from the window. When I reach the door, I pause. I can hear them. Simon's laugh, the tinkle of glasses. Alana's voice, sharp and bright, commanding. I've played this scene in my head 1,000 times, always with me on the other side of the glass, peering in like a ghost. Not tonight. I lift my hand and knock. Firm, deliberate. The porch light flickers overhead, catching the frost in my hair. For a second, no one comes. Then the door swings open, and it's her. Alana. She's dressed like she stepped out of a magazine. Red silk blouse, gold earrings that catch the hallway light. Her smile doesn't reach her eyes. Elise. She says my name like it tastes wrong. What are you doing here? I hold her gaze, the envelope burning in my pocket. It's Christmas Eve, Alana. I came to see my family. She steps forward, blocking the doorway just enough to make her point. I thought we were clear last year. You were. I push past her, my boots thudding on the parquet floor she insisted Simon buy. But things change. I catch Simon in the kitchen, halfway to a laugh, his face dropping when he sees me. He's older than me by 3 years, but you wouldn't know it. He's always looked lost in his own house. Elise, he says, voice cracking. You should have called. I drop my bag by the door. Would you have answered? Holohtoi. He opens his mouth, closes it. The guests, they're his friends mostly, are watching from the lounge, cheap wine glasses frozen halfway to their lips. It's a good party, the kind where everyone pretends they're better people than they really are. Alana slides in beside Simon, her arm linking through his like a snake coiling around prey. This is really not the time, Elise. We have guests. Maybe next week. I pull the envelope from my pocket, hold it up between 2 fingers like a dealer laying down the winning card. Actually, now's perfect. Simon frowns. What is that? Your mortgage. I let the words sink in. My signature. My money. A pin could drop. I watched the smile slide off Alana's face, the mask slipping just enough to show the panic underneath. She looks at me like I'm a stain on her cream carpet. Elise, we've been through this. She starts, but I cut her off. No, Alana, you've talked at me. I'm done listening. I glance at Simon. You never told her, did you? How I gave you the deposit when the bank laughed you out the door. How I covered the first 3 months when you lost your job. How I never asked for it back. Simon's mouth opens and closes like a fish. I almost feel sorry for him. Almost. Alana's voice drops to a hiss. You can't just waltz in here and ruin Christmas. I tilt my head, studying her. Ruin it? Or remind you what it costs to shut the door on someone who built the house you're standing in? A murmur ripples through the room. Nobody knows where to look. I don't care. For once, I want them to see. I move past them, straight to the fireplace where the stockings hang. 3 names embroidered in gold thread. Simon, Alana, and their perfect little boy, Oscar. Not me. Never me. I stand there, the fire spitting embers, and I feel something settle in my chest. Not anger. No, that's old. This is resolve. I face them. I'm not leaving. Not tonight. Not ever again. I'm tired of pretending I don't belong in a house I helped build. Simon looks like he might cry. Alana's jaw tightens, eyes darting to the guests who are already whispering. Good. Let them talk. Somewhere in the hallway, Oscar peeks out from behind the stairs, his eyes wide. He's too young to know the history, but one day he'll understand that family isn't just who you invite in, it's who you can't lock out. I meet his gaze and smile. Alana moves toward me, voice low and sharp. If you stay, you'll regret it. I lean in, my words soft but unyielding. No, Alana, you will. And for the first time in years, I feel it. Something like freedom, or maybe power. Maybe they're the same thing when you've spent your whole life apologizing for taking up space. Outside, the snow begins to fall, dusting the world in white. Inside, I'm rooted, unmovable, because I know something she doesn't yet. This house isn't the only thing with my name on it. And tomorrow, when the truth unravels, she'll wish she'd never tried to keep me out. .. I stared at the mortgage email again as dawn light seeped through the curtains, my thoughts racing like fireflies in a jar. How had they pulled this off? And more importantly, what did it mean for me? It began with a single step. I needed answers. I tucked my phone into my coat pocket and set out into the crisp morning air, determination hardening my spine. My first stop was the county recorder's office, a red brick building at the edge of downtown, where public documents waited like silent witnesses to every home purchase in Savannah. The line at the recorder's office moved slowly, people clutching folders and flashing nervous smiles. When my turn came, I approached the counter, lifting my chin to meet the clerk's gaze. "Good morning," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to request the mortgage documents for 312 East York Street." The clerk, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, tapped at her keyboard. "One moment, dear." She printed a stack of papers and slid them across the counter. "Here you go." I thanked her and slipped into a seat by the window. The pages detailed the home's appraisal, the terms of the loan, and signatures. 2 signatures. Daniel's clear, practiced hand. And mine, or rather, a near-perfect forgery. I traced the letters of my name with a shaking finger. There it was. Marisol Evora, co-borrower, co-owner, shackled to debt I never agreed to. The implications hit me like a bucket of ice water. If this was on public record, any bank could come after me for payments, for collections, for credit damage. And if my brother and his wife had done this, facing them wouldn't be easy. I needed legal help. I snapped photos of the documents with my phone and hurried out, my breath visible in the cold. The steep steps to my apartment building felt like a mountain, but I powered through, pushed by a mixture of fear and fury. Inside, I dialed Priya's number. My best friend from law school, now a practicing attorney who specialized in family law and real estate disputes. When she answered, her voice was warm but concerned. "Marisol? Everything okay?" No, I said, breathing hard. They've put me on the mortgage of my brother's house without my consent. I need you to look at these documents. There was a silence as her mind processed my words. That's serious. Email them to me. I'll review and call you right back. I hung up and sent the photos, my heart pounding. Within an hour, Priya called. This is fraud, Marisol. Document forgery, identity theft. We can file a petition to set aside the mortgage and clear your name, but we need a good reason to establish they did this knowingly. I sank onto the couch. Why would they do this? She paused. Maybe they needed your co-signature to qualify for better terms. But they'd need you to sign at closing. Unless... My mind raced. Unless they forged it without me present. Exactly. We'll need to subpoena the closing agent and find out who was present. Also your brother. He'll have to testify. I felt a pang of dread. Facing my brother in court felt impossible, but I had no choice. Over the next days, I worked with Priya, gathering records and drafting pleadings. At night, I sat at the kitchen table, columns of numbers and legal citations spread before me, feeding my determination. The flicker of streetlights cast long shadows, but I embraced the darkness. It felt honest. Exactly. We'll need to subpoena the closing agent and find out who was present. Also, your brother. He'll have to testify. I felt a pang of dread. Facing my brother in court felt impossible, but I had no choice. Over the next days, I worked with Priya, gathering records and drafting pleadings. At night, I sat at the kitchen table, columns of numbers and legal citations spread before me, feeding my determination. The flicker of streetlights cast long shadows, but I embraced the darkness. It felt honest. Meanwhile, word of my legal maneuver spread through my family. My mother called, her voice quivering with shock and guilt. Misha, is it true? She asked. Yes, Mama. I'm going after Dan and his wife. Tears cracked in her voice. They never should have done this. But maybe they're in trouble. I didn't reply, wrapping the phone in silence. I didn't want her pity. I wanted answers. On the morning of the hearing, snow, a rare sight in Savannah, coated the sidewalks. I watched the flakes drift down, each one unique, each one reminding me of the fragility of truth. In the cold marble hallway of the courthouse, I felt small. Priya at my side, we waited for my brother and his wife to arrive. When they did, she was dressed in a tailored coat the color of mahogany, her hair perfectly styled. My brother looked uneasy, his eyes darting as he entered. They didn't acknowledge me. They walked past, heads held high, the unspoken tension crackling in the air like static. Priya whispered, "Stay calm." Inside the courtroom, I took a seat at the plaintiff's table, the mortgage documents laid out before me like battlefield maps. The judge, a stern woman with an impeccable bun, called the case. As the opening statements began, my stomach churned. But with every legal argument Priya made, every question she posed to the closing agent, who confirmed that I'd never signed anything in his presence, my resolve solidified. But then, the defense turned to my brother. He rose, his face pale, jaw tight, and began to speak. I trusted my wife. I thought she was acting on my behalf. Every word struck me like a blow. He was blaming her. Or was he trying to absolve himself? The courtroom hung on his words. As I watched him, I realized the fight was bigger than money or deceit. It was about trust, about betrayal. And it was far from over. Suddenly, the judge banged her gavel. "We'll take a recess." I held my breath as the bailiff ushered us out. I felt her eyes on me, my brother's wife. Her lips a thin, unreadable line. I clenched my fists. The next phase of this battle was about to begin, and I had a surprise that would turn their world upside down. The hush that followed that recess felt like the warrant for a storm. I sat in the courtroom, palms damp, heart hammering, as the judge peered at counsel. Priya leaned close and whispered, "They're rattled. Your brother's testimony missed something." I swallowed, the memory of his faltering voice echoing in my mind. He'd painted himself as the oblivious husband, But I knew better. After all, he and I had shared secrets. Secrets I thought he cherished. The bailiff's announcement cut through my thoughts. All rise, court is in session. I rose, clutching the edge of the plaintiff's table, unwilling to look at the defense table where Daniel and his wife sat like statues. The judge called for the next witness, the loan officer's assistant, Carla Mitchell. Carla was a petite woman with curly hair and anxious eyes. Under Priya's questioning, she recounted the closing. I remember Mrs. Evora signing here, and here. She just zipped through it, barely glancing. Shock pierced me. But Carla, did you confirm it was Mrs. Evora Marisol Evora by ID? Priya pressed. Carla paused. I checked a driver's license. The photo matched the signature name. I didn't know it was forged until now. There it was, the linchpin. A fake driver's license, an insider's trick. I felt my blood run cold. Someone had gone to great lengths. The defense attorney sprang to life. Objection. Speculation. The judge sustained but allowed the testimony. As Carla was excused, I stared at the defense table. My brother's wife tapped her polished nails on the table, her gaze icy. The calculus shifted. She was no mere accomplice. She was the architect. Then Priya requested the company's security footage. The judge granted it. The footage arrived an hour later on a grainy DVD. We watched in Priya's cramped office, the hum of the copier, a steady background beat. The timestamp showed me in the office on the day of closing, except it wasn't me. It was a woman with the same build, wearing my coat, sitting at the table, signing documents. My chest tightened. That coat was vintage, thrifted, from a Paris flea market, one of a kind. The woman looked like me, moved like me, but I wasn't there. Someone had impersonated me. Priya paused the video on a frame. You knew someone could do this, right? You said you noticed that coat. Did anyone else have access? I swallowed. I'd worn that coat to a holiday party a week before moving back at my brother's house. Daniel's wife had helped me hang it in the coat closet. Then it clicked. Next morning I stood in that closet, phone in hand, scrolling through photos from the party. There I was, laughing with a hot drink in hand, the coat draped over my shoulders. In another, Daniel's wife took a selfie with me, the closet behind us. I felt bile rise. She'd had the perfect opportunity to borrow my coat, forge my signature, and disappear before anyone knew. That afternoon in court, Priya laid the trap. She called Daniel's wife to the stand. I watched her composure crack under Priya's precise questioning. Did you have access to Mrs. Evora's personal possessions before the closing? Priya asked. I simply thought she wouldn't come, so I looked through her coat pockets while organizing them, then lent it to a friend for a costume. A friend. That word tasted like poison. This friend, Priya continued, was she present at the closing? Her eyes flicked to her husband, then back. No. So you lied under oath. You orchestrated this fraud. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. My brother's wife, the woman who had banned me from Christmas, whose name was on my mortgage, was unraveling. The judge leaned forward. Counselor, you have evidence of perjury? Priya nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Security footage corroborates Mrs. Evora's fraudulent signature impersonation. Gasps rippled through the gallery. My brother sank into his chair, face ashen. But just as relief began to warm me, the door to the courtroom flew open. A tall man in a dark suit strode in, holding a stack of papers. Whispers spread. He was the loan company's regional manager. He approached the bench, cleared his throat. Your Honor, urgent development. He handed the judge a file. During routine audit, we discovered that the loan officer who processed this file has a history of embezzlement and document tampering. My heart sank. Another twist. The judge scanned the report. Is this related to the mortgage in question? He nodded gravely. Yes. We believe he orchestrated multiple frauds, including fabricating signatories. My mind reeled. The man who'd signed off on the mortgage, the one behind the desk, he was the puppet master. Priya shook her head. This changes things. We need to investigate him. The judge sighed. Court will reconvene next week after further review. As the gavel fell, I realized the battle had grown beyond my brother's household. It was systemic, sinister. Everything I had fought for could be lost if the loan company buried the truth. I left the courtroom, numb, the weight of the world on my shoulders. Outside, the December sky wept sleet. For a moment, I thought of Christmas. The fragrance of pine, the laughter of family. My family. But everything had shifted. The person I thought I knew, my brother, my sister-in-law, the loan officer, they were all players in a game I barely understood. And I was running out of time. I simply thought she wouldn't come. So I looked through her coat pockets while organizing them, then lent it to a friend for a costume. A friend. That word tasted like poison. This friend, Priya continued, was she present at the closing? Her eyes flicked to her husband, then back. No. So you lied under oath. You orchestrated this fraud. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. My brother's wife, the woman who had banned me from Christmas, whose name was on my mortgage, was unraveling. The judge leaned forward. Counselor, you have evidence of perjury? Priya nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Security footage corroborates Mrs. Avora's fraudulent signature impersonation. Gasps rippled through the gallery. My brother sank into his chair, face ashen. But just as relief began to warm me, the door to the courtroom flew open. A tall man in a dark suit strode in, holding a stack of papers. Whispers spread. He was the loan company's regional manager. He approached the bench, cleared his throat. Your Honor, urgent development. He handed the judge a file. During routine audit, we discovered that the loan officer who processed this file has a history of embezzlement and document tampering. My heart sank. Another twist. The judge scanned the report. Is this related to the mortgage in question? He nodded gravely. Yes, we believe he orchestrated multiple frauds, including fabricating signatories. My mind reeled. The man who'd signed off on the mortgage, the one behind the desk, he was the puppet master. Priya shook her head. This changes things. We need to investigate him. The judge sighed. Court will reconvene next week after further review. As the gavel fell, I realized the battle had grown beyond my brother's household. It was systemic, sinister. Everything I had fought for could be lost if the loan company buried the truth. I left the courtroom, numb, the weight of the world on my shoulders. Outside, the December sky wept sleet. For a moment, I thought of Christmas, the fragrance of pine, the laughter of family. My family. But everything had shifted. The person I thought I knew, my brother, my sister-in-law, the loan officer, they were all players in a game I barely understood, and I was running out of time. The week that followed felt like traversing a minefield in the dead of night. Each day, I woke to new developments. Letters from the loan company, affidavits from the rogue loan officer, and a subpoena for Daniel himself. I paced my apartment, the walls closing in, resolved that I would not be intimidated. Sunday dawned gray, the sky heavy with sleet. I sat at my desk, memorizing the timeline: party, code in closet, closing, fake signature. Each moment a thread in the tapestry of this deception. My phone buzzed, a text from Priya. Meet me at the cafe, urgent. I bundled into my coat and headed to Sitara's cafe, the place where I used to meet my brother over steaming cups of chai. Today, it felt charged with tension. Priya was already there, her face grim. They filed a motion to dismiss the case, she said, sliding a court document across the table. My heart sank. Why? They argue that the loan officer acted independently, without the knowledge of your brother or his wife. They're pinning the entire fraud on him, hoping to claim you're an unwitting victim entirely removed from the scheme. I skimmed the text. It sought to sever any link between Daniel's wife and the crime, casting her in the best light possible. They're trying to isolate you and Dan from it, Priya continued. If successful, it could derail our case. I gritted my teeth. Then we exposed the lies. Back at my apartment, I rifled through my brother's childhood keepsakes, hoping for evidence of his wife's behavior. emails, photos, messages. Then, buried under old yearbooks, I found something unexpected, a flash drive labeled Holiday Plans 2024. My pulse quickened. I plugged it into my laptop, and files populated the desktop, folder after folder of emails, payment confirmations, and scanned documents. And one file stood out, mortgage_closing_2023.pdf. I opened it, and there it was, a draft of the mortgage agreement with notes in the margin. Better rate if Marisol listed as co-borrower. The date, 2 weeks before the closing. Even more damning, an email chain between Daniel's wife and the loan officer discussing the plan. My breath caught. This was the proof we needed. Priya and I spent that night preparing an amended petition, attaching the digital evidence alongside my eyewitness account. At dawn, we filed it with the court. The next hearing loomed. Snow fell heavier, coating Savannah in a crystalline hush. I stood before the judge, heart drumming in my ears, as Priya presented the flash drive evidence. The courtroom reeled. Daniel's wife slid down in her seat, her lips pressed together. My brother looked as though the ground had opened beneath him. But then, the defense attorney rose. "Your Honor, this evidence was not produced in discovery. It's a surprise. We request time to verify its authenticity." The judge stared at the flash drive. "Counsel, do you have verification?" Priya nodded. "We have metadata analysis from a certified digital forensics expert." The judge considered. "I will admit it under seal and allow verification. We reconvene tomorrow." She banged the gavel. As we exited, I realized that I was on the brink of victory or collapse. My brother's name hovered over everything, and whether he stood with me or against me would decide the course of my life. I steeled myself. Tomorrow, everything would change. The courtroom was a hushed theater the next morning, every spectator leaning forward as the bailiff cleared his throat and called for order. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my heart thudding so hard I feared it would echo in the silent room. Across from me, Daniel's wife perched on the edge of her seat, her gaze flicking to the judge, to her husband, to me, and back again. Priya rose and advanced to the bench, clutching her notes with calm authority. "Your Honor, we submit for sealed review the digital evidence acquired after discovery. The flash drive contains metadata logs, email exchanges, and draft documents that conclusively demonstrate the orchestration of the fraudulent mortgage by the defendants." The judge nodded and instructed the court clerk to play the submitted transcript while her clerk reviewed the sealed file. Moments later, the quiet was punctuated by excerpts from the digital forensics report. Log entry 47. Mortgage_closing_2023.pdf, created by user Devora on December 1, 2023, with editing rights granted to C. Newman and Mavora. My name and the initials of Daniel's wife and the loan officer floated in the air. The judge's eyebrows lifted. "Counselor, is Devora my brother's wife?" Priya nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, and the entry timestamp aligns with the draft's creation 2 weeks prior to closing." The courtroom buzzed. My brother looked stricken. The color drained from his face. Then, a murmur rippled as the clerk produced the internal email thread. Priya held up copies for all to see. Email from C. Newman to Devora. Subject: Revised closing docs. Attached the updated mortgage agreement with your sister-in-law as co-borrower. Will finalize on the 3rd. Followed by a reply from Devora. Perfect. She won't notice. Let's schedule the signing when she's away. My blood roared in my ears. I locked eyes with Daniel's wife. Her lips were pressed in a thin line. The defense attorney rose, face tight. He called Carla Mitchell back to the stand. Under oath, she confirmed the forgeries. With each admission, the facade of innocence crumbled. Halfway through the testimony, Priya paused. She turned to me and whispered, "Stay strong." I nodded, chest aching with triumph and grief. ... This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. ... When Carla left the stand, the air felt electric. Priya laid out the timeline, synthesizing the metadata, the emails, the impersonation footage, and the motive. The lower interest rate my cousin-in-law secured saved them tens of thousands in interest over the life of the loan. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Evora, Did you ever give permission, verbally or in writing, for your name to be on this mortgage? She asked me. I rose, feeling the courtroom's eyes on me. Never. I found out by accident when I got an email about a loan I never agreed to. My voice wavered, but the room was silent in support. I was banned from Christmas in the same conversation. A ripple of shocked gasps. Daniel's wife's composure cracked. Very well, the judge said. I will rule on the petition within 2 days. Outside, investigators from the loan company confronted Carla and C. Newman, the rogue loan officer, escorted in handcuffs. The defender's strategy melted away. I stepped into the cold December air, the sleet stinging my cheeks like tears. Priya wrapped her arm around my shoulder. You did it, she said softly. I exhaled, eyes bright. But as I looked toward the courthouse, I saw my brother standing alone at the steps, head bowed. Our history, our bond, felt heavy between us. I squared my shoulders. The fight for my name, for justice, had been won, but the fight for my family's heart was just beginning. I felt the bitterness of the December wind press against my back as I climbed the courthouse steps once more. A fresh blanket of snow gleamed in the pale morning light, and every crunch under my boots reminded me of how far I'd come, and how far I still had to go. Inside the courtroom, foamy breath rose from the mouths of spectators as they huddled together, clutching programs and coffee cups. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table, my papers organized in neat stacks, my laptop open to Priya's notes. Across the room, my brother sat alone on a bench, shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on an unseen point in the distance. His wife was nowhere to be seen. Her absence spoke volumes. The judge entered, and the murmur of the crowd hushed to a pin-drop silence. Priya leaned in and whispered, "They didn't show?" I shook my head. She didn't want to face the music. The judge nodded curtly and addressed the courtroom. We reconvened to hear the ruling on the petition to set aside the mortgage and related relief. Priya stood, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Your Honor, our petition rests on 2 grounds. First, that the mortgage was procured through fraud and forgery. Second, that Ms. Evora has suffered irreparable harm through damage to her credit and family relationships. The judge waved her onward, then turned to the defense table, now occupied solely by a somber Daniel. He looked to his attorney, who rose to deliver the defense's response. Your Honor, the defense attorney began, voice steady. Mr. Evora acknowledges the wrongdoing. While he regrets his involvement, he was unaware of the full extent of the scheme. We propose a resolution. The mortgage is restructured to remove Ms. Evora's name, and the lender will absorb the financial difference. I felt my stomach lurch. A resolution without accountability felt hollow. I rose to speak, heart pounding. Your Honor, with all due respect, this proposal ignores the harm caused by a deliberate, premeditated act. I didn't just lose my credit. I was cast out of my own family. A simple financial restructuring won't heal that breach of trust. I ask the court not only to rescind the mortgage, but to order compensatory damages for emotional distress. A collective hush fell. Daniel's head snapped up, pain and guilt etched on his face. The judge folded her hands. Ms. Evora, are you seeking monetary relief? I swallowed. Yes, Your Honor, enough to cover credit repair, legal fees, and therapy. The judge considered. I will grant the motion to set aside the mortgage in its entirety. Regarding damages, the court will consider evidence. We will reconvene in 2 weeks to hear testimony on appropriate compensation. A weight lifted from me, but the directive for a new hearing hung over us like a storm cloud. Asterisk. After court, I stepped into the foyer, where reporters jostled with cameras. A young journalist ran up to me. Marisol, can you comment on your victory? She asked, microphone extended. I paused. This is a victory, but the fight isn't over. Truth was obscured, trust broken. I'm committed to making sure no one else suffers like this. She nodded, scribbling notes. I turned and saw Daniel leaning against a column. Coat collar turned up. Marisol, he called softly, his voice ragged. I walked toward him, breathing in the antiseptic air. I'm sorry, he said, eyes brimming with tears. I was blind. I let her, and my own pride, destroy what we had. I studied him. Memories flashing. Childhood birthdays, whispered secrets under bed covers, late-night talks on the porch swing. The man before me was fragile, broken by his own complicity. "Daniel," I began, voice trembling, "this isn't just about the money. You and I, our bond was used as a pawn. If we're going to move forward, things have to change." He nodded vigorously. "I know. I want to help you make this right." I exhaled, a fragile hope kindling. "Then start by telling the truth publicly. Stand with me at the next hearing." He hesitated, then said, "I will." But as I turned to leave, a commotion at the entrance rattled me. Police officers escorted a man in handcuffs heading toward the courtroom doors. It was the judge's bailiff, his uniform crisp but stained with panic. My heart seized. The bailiff had been handling my case from the start. Why was he under arrest? Questions swirled as icy snow began to fall outside the courthouse's grand windows. I realized that even though I'd won the mortgage battle, the deeper conspiracy extended further than I'd ever imagined. And the next hearing would challenge everything I thought I knew about justice, loyalty, and betrayal. As the doors slammed shut behind that arrested figure, I felt the tremor of a new catastrophe, one that threatened not only my victory, but the very scaffolding of the legal system I'd trusted. And I had to be ready. I watched in stunned silence as the court bailiff was led away in handcuffs, his uniform crisp yet incongruous against the severity of the moment. The hush in the grand foyer of the courthouse was deafening, broken only by the echoing clang of cell doors in the distance. My gut churned. The bailiff, someone I'd encountered at every hearing, the neutral pivot of ceremony and order, now revealed as a perpetrator in the conspiracy. Everything I'd believed about the system felt like sand slipping through my fingers. I stepped forward as Daniel joined me, his face ashen. "Marisol, did you see what just happened?" I nodded, struggling to steady my voice. "I can't believe it. He was part of it." A detective intercepted us, badge gleaming beneath his overcoat. "Ms. Evora? I'm Detective Harold Kane. May I have a word?" We followed him into an empty office nearby. He closed the door behind us, the click of the latch reverberating ominously. "Your case has piqued our department's interest," he began. "We've uncovered evidence linking the bailiff, Michael Trent, to a network of corruption. It appears he took bribes to manipulate case assignments and evidence flow." He regarded me gravely. "Your hearing was among those affected. Time warped. My courtroom victories, the bailiff's procedural rulings, they were suspect." I blinked as memories surfaced. The bailiff's insistence on issuing last-minute subpoenas, his stern admonitions that favored certain witnesses. Detective Kane pressed on. "We believe Trent funneled evidence to C. Newman and others orchestrating these frauds. We need your cooperation to untangle this network." I clasped Daniel's hand, drawing strength. "I'll do anything." My voice sounded foreign, raspy, raw. The detective slid a file onto the desk. "It's connected to other cases. A judge involved, court clerks, even some attorney liaisons. The tentacles spread far. You may be at risk." I swallowed, icy dread pooling in my stomach. "I'm already at risk." He nodded. "We'll assign protection detail for your next hearing. But we need more. Do you have any interactions with Trent that felt unusual?" Daniel furrowed his brow. "He delivered paperwork for us, asked personal questions about Ms. Evora's mortgage. He seemed curious about your relationship with her, like he was fishing." I shivered. "He did ask if I had family emergency. I thought it was small talk." Detective Kane exhaled. "He was mapping relationships, gauging vulnerabilities. Luckily, we caught him." We left the office and returned to the hallway. The bailiff's cell closed with a final clang, as though sealing something irrevocable in the courthouse's walls. That afternoon I sat in my apartment, the weight of the day pressing down like a vice. Daniel perched on the arm of the sofa, study of guilt and remorse. "I never imagined something like this," he said hoarsely. "I feel responsible that you got dragged into this." Tears stung my eyes. He wasn't the only one. This whole network. It's bigger than you, or Cecilia. He flinched at the mention of his wife's name. I realized I'd been thinking of her as merely the wife, but in Justice's reckoning, she was no bystander. "I'm going to testify at the hearing," he said determinedly. "I need to set things right, Marisol." I nodded, the ache in my chest both familiar and new. "Thank you. We'll need every bit of truth you can offer." Over the next week, we prepared. Priya arranged for me to testify last, while Daniel would appear first. We mapped out questioning, dug up more emails, call logs, anything hinting at the bailiff's involvement, from small bribes slipped under tables to threats conveyed via cryptic notes. On the eve of the hearing, I hardly slept. The sliver of moon cast shadows across the room, flickering candles on my desk. I penned a letter to my mother, explaining everything in detail, afraid it might be the last time I wrote something so personal before facing the abyss. When I arrived at the courthouse the next morning, 2 plainclothes officers flanked me. Detective Kane offered a curt nod. His presence was a grim comfort. The courtroom shimmered under fluorescent lights. Daniel stood in front of the stand, back ramrod straight. Pride and pain warred in his eyes. I took my seat as the bailiff's role was shifted to another official, someone anonymous, unseen. The judge, different today in a dark robe and soft bun, greeted us. "This hearing shall resume. We'll address the motion for damages and review the additional evidence regarding bailiff misconduct." Daniel's attorney went first. He questioned Trent's successor, who testified that Trent had secret access to case files and would manipulate documents as he saw fit. The detective corroborated with internal memos describing suspicious amendments made to orders. Finally, my turn. Priya asked me to recount how I discovered the mortgage, the forged signatures, and how the bailiff's actions influenced evidence timelines. I recounted each moment, voice steady though my hands trembled. When I described Trent's lecture about personal emergencies, the judge scribbled notes. After my testimony, Priya introduced the final exhibit, a voicemail from Trent on C. Newman's phone, instructing him to delay the call to my lawyer and reroute subpoenas so the case would stall. The recording was irrefutable. Trent's voice, urgent and conspiratorial. Gasps echoed. Daniel's wife was nowhere to be seen. My chest swelled with vindication and sorrow. The judge nodded gravely. "I will deliberate and issue my ruling on damages and potential criminal referrals against the involved parties. Court is adjourned until tomorrow." As the gavel fell, I realized the battle had no end until every thread of corruption was severed. Justice was not a destination, but a journey. Walking out into the snow, I felt the world drop away. The courthouse loomed behind me, a monolith of promises and failures. Daniel pressed a coffee cup into my hands. "You did it," he said. "You're incredible." I managed a small smile. We did it together. But as I sipped the bitter coffee, my thoughts drifted to the next step. Repairing my credit, mending my family, reclaiming my identity. The mortgage was gone, but life's ledger still demanded restitution. With each breath of cold air, I resolved to continue, until truth was absolute and forgiveness possible. The journey was far from over. I pressed my palm against the frosted glass of my apartment window, watching the sun rise over the snow-dusted rooftops of Savannah. The world glimmered in pale gold, as if offering forgiveness for yesterday's storms. But I could not find forgiveness yet, only purpose. The week following the hearing had been a whirlwind of paperwork, phone calls, and cautious steps. I spent mornings at the credit bureau, disputing inaccuracies and reestablishing my financial identity. I faced agents who questioned the legitimacy of my claims, who blinked in surprise when I handed them court orders rescinding the mortgage. Each small victory, credit scores restored, debt removed, felt like bone setting after a long break. But there was a vacancy in my chest where family used to be. Late afternoon, Daniel arrived at my door, snowflakes settling on his shoulders like punctuation. His eyes were red, tired and sincere. "Marisol," he began softly, "I know I've asked a lot of you. If you need space—" I shook my head. "No, I need you, but I need to know where we stand." He exhaled, reaching for my hand. "I spoke to Mama. She's terrified for you, for us. She wants to help. The family wants to help." A tremor of hope flickered. "Then let them. We have a lot to fix." We settled at the kitchen table, steaming mugs between us. and drafted emails inviting my mother, my aunt, and my uncle for a small gathering once the storm passed. Daniel suggested we host Christmas at my apartment. A fresh start, a Christmas untainted by secrets. I hesitated at the thought of Christine's absence, my sister-in-law's empty chair, but swallowed the bitterness. This was about rebuilding, not revenge. Asterisk. The weekend before Christmas, I transformed my apartment into a haven. Twinkling fairy lights wrapped the windows, pine boughs scented the air, and a homemade gingerbread wreath adorned the door. I played soft carols on a loop, modern jazz renditions that felt like warm scarves around my soul. On the day, my mother arrived first, cheeks pink from the cold. She enveloped me in a hug so fierce it nearly knocked me over. Hija, she whispered, you are so brave. My aunt and uncle arrived next, bearing casseroles and homemade tamales. We laughed over spilt cranberry sauce and swapped stories of childhood misadventure. The kitchen buzzed with familial warmth. But as twilight fell, I noticed Daniel glancing at the door as if expecting someone else. Your wife? I asked gently, keeping my voice light. He flinched. She didn't respond to the invitation. I felt a pang, less anger than sorrow. Maybe she needs time. He nodded, but I sensed the fissure would not heal easily. Dinner was a feast of tradition and compromise. Green beans, mashed potato soufflés, vegan red velvet cake, my aunt's insistence. My mother recited a prayer, and we held hands, an unbroken circle. As plates cleared, my aunt pulled me aside. Marisol, dear, I have something for you. She handed me a small, wood-carved music box. Inside, a note. May this always remind you of your voice. I opened it, and a soft lullaby played. Tears welled up. Thank you. Asterisk. After my family left, Daniel and I sat by the fire, mugs of cocoa in hand. I know you're still hurting, he said. He paused, gathering courage. I want you to know I never doubted you. It took me too long to see the truth. I turned to him, the firelight dancing in his eyes. I never stopped loving you, Daniel. But trust is earned. He took my hand. Teach me. I squeezed his fingers, and in that moment the snowstorm outside receded. A metaphor I could accept. But as midnight approached, my phone buzzed. A text from Detective Kane. Urgent. Need to meet ASAP. Evidence surfaced. My heart sank. Just when I thought the worst was behind me, a new revelation loomed. I looked at Daniel, eyes wide. It's not over. And as the clock struck 12, I realized that Christmas wasn't just a day of miracles, it was the precipice of another battle for truth. The night Detective Kane's text arrived, I lay awake staring at the cracks in my ceiling. I could feel the weight of the words vibrating against my chest. Urgent. Need to meet ASAP. Evidence surfaced. It was Christmas night, but peace refused to settle over my tiny apartment. I threw on my coat and boots, leaving Daniel snoring softly on the couch, and slipped into the icy street. Snowflakes glittered beneath the street lamps as I made my way to the precinct. Detective Kane was waiting in the small conference room, surrounded by files and a battered laptop. His tie was loose, eyes ringed in exhaustion. He gestured for me to sit. Marisol, thank you for coming. We've cracked open more of Trent's encrypted drive. There's something you need to see. He turned the laptop to face me. Grainy surveillance stills populated the screen. Courthouse hallways, a coffee shop, the corridor outside my old apartment. In every frame, a familiar silhouette lingered near the edges. Christine, my pulse hammered. What is this? Kane leaned forward. Your sister-in-law didn't just orchestrate the mortgage scam. She tailed you for months, gathering information on your passwords, your signature, your ID habits. She created a trail that made it look like you'd co-signed willingly. Trent kept tabs for her in exchange for cash under the table. I pressed a trembling hand over my mouth. How could she? Kane sighed. It gets worse. We think she's fled the state. The paper trail stops cold 2 days ago. She may be trying to liquidate the funds. My chest tightened, anger and betrayal knotting my insides like a live wire. What do you need from me? Full cooperation again. We need a sworn statement that fills in the gaps, where you were when she staged these shots, who could verify your alibis, every detail. You've been consistent, but we need it airtight to file interstate fraud charges. I nodded, teeth clamped tight to keep them from chattering. When do you need it? He pushed a recorder across the table. Now. I spoke for nearly 2 hours, voice raw, throat burning from reliving every humiliating detail. The holiday party, the forged closing, the moments I'd been blindsided by my brother's betrayal. By the end, I felt as hollowed out as a scorched log. Kane squeezed my shoulder. You've done well. Stay ready. They may call you to testify in a federal courtroom. Back at my apartment, I found Daniel awake, pacing. You were gone so long, he said, panic etched in the creases around his eyes. Where did you go? I sank onto the couch. Kane has new evidence. Christine's been watching me for months. She's on the run now. His face went pale. She planned everything? All this time? And I didn't see it. His grief was a splinter under my skin. You weren't the only one fooled, Daniel. We all were. He sat beside me, burying his face in his hands. What do we do now? I leaned my head against his shoulder, a fragile alliance in the dark. We fight until the truth is so loud it can't be buried. Asterisk. Days bled into nights as the investigation turned national. Christine's photo popped up in news reports. Wanted for identity fraud, forgery, embezzlement. The phone rang non-stop. Prosecutors, reporters, even strangers claiming they'd seen her. One night, exhausted and numb, I returned to my email to find an anonymous message. Meet me. If you want the truth, come alone. Attached was a grainy photo. Christine, hair chopped short, slipping into a budget motel off I-95. I stared at it, my pulse thundering. Was it real? A trap? Daniel begged me not to go alone. Priya warned me to call Kane. But deep down, I knew some truths needed to be dragged into the light with my own hands. I parked outside the motel under a flickering neon sign. Heart slamming, I stepped inside the tiny lobby, the clerk barely glancing up. The corridor reeked of mildew and stale cigarettes. When I knocked on room 12, the door swung open an inch. Christine's eyes peered through the crack. Wild, feral as if she hadn't slept in days. Marisol, she rasped. You came. I stepped inside, bracing for anything. The room was chaos. Takeout containers, crumpled receipts, an open laptop displaying bank transfers. You ruined me, she spat. Everything was fine until you stuck your nose where it didn't belong. I laughed bitterly. You forged my name, you stole my credit, you made my family hate me. And I ruined you? She lunged at her laptop, but I grabbed her wrist. She recoiled like I'd struck her. I want the truth, I said, voice low. Every last detail. Why? Her eyes glistened, tears or rage. I couldn't tell. I did it for him, for Daniel. He never saw you for what you are. Always perfect Marisol, always the favorite. I just wanted my own security, my own home. She sank onto the grimy bed, burying her face. I'm so tired. I didn't feel pity, only an exhausted ache for what we'd lost. Sirens wailed in the distance. I stepped back, opening the door. 2 officers swept in, handcuffs gleaming. Marisol Evora? One asked. I nodded numbly. Christine didn't resist. She just whispered, You always win, don't you? But I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt the hollow echo of betrayal, louder than any cell door slamming shut. I called Daniel from the parking lot. He answered on the first ring. Is it over? He asked. I stared at the motel sign flickering in the darkness. Not yet, I said softly. But maybe it will be. The drive home from that shabby motel felt like drifting through a blizzard with no headlights. Christine's last words replayed in my head on an endless loop. You always win, don't you? But it didn't feel like winning, not even close. When I stepped into my apartment, Daniel was waiting. He rose from the couch the moment he saw my face. "Where is she?" he asked. "Gone," I said, my voice like sandpaper. "They took her." She didn't resist. He sank back down, burying his face in his palms. I sat beside him, the air heavy with things left unsaid. "Did she say why?" he asked, his words muffled. I thought about that dingy motel room, the clutter of receipts and bank transfers, the bitterness in her eyes. "She said it was for you. For security. She thought I'd always overshadow her." He laughed bitterly, a sound that cracked like thin ice. "And I let her." I put my hand over his. "No, she chose her own betrayal. You didn't sign those papers, Daniel. You didn't forge my name, she did." He pulled his hand away, staring at the window where snowflakes drifted past the street lamp glow. "Still, I let her get close enough to do it. And I pushed you away when you needed me most." I swallowed the anger rising in my throat. Anger wouldn't fix anything now. "Daniel, listen to me. We can't rewrite what happened. But we can decide how we heal." He turned to me, eyes glistening. "How?" I squeezed his hand. "By telling the truth. By standing together when they call us to testify. By being family again. If you want that." He nodded slowly, a small spark of hope in the wreckage. "I do. More than anything." Asterisk. The days that followed blurred into a monotony of statements, meetings, court filings. Priya moved like a general in battle, coordinating my testimony for the federal case that would bring Christine's fraud to light on a national scale. She assured me that my financial damage claim would survive, that restitution was possible. But as I sat in my living room, listening to the radiator hiss, I knew the money wasn't what I wanted. I wanted the scars to fade, the trust to rebuild. One morning, a knock rattled my door. When I opened it, my mother stood there, her eyes full of the same storm I'd seen brewing inside myself for months. "May I come in?" she asked, voice trembling. "Of course, Mama." She stepped inside and looked around at my tiny living room, the fairy lights still twinkling on the mantel. She took my face in her hands. "I failed you," she said. "I should have protected you. When you were little, I promised your father I'd keep you safe. I didn't." I shook my head. "No, Mama, you didn't fail me. The people who lied did. You've always loved me. That's enough." She pressed her forehead to mine, tears slipping free. "I love you more than life, Marisol. I will stand with you. Always." And just like that, some corner of my soul unclenched. Asterisk. A week later, Daniel and I sat side by side in the federal courthouse, waiting for the hearing to begin. Christine's trial had become the talk of the state, headlines splashed with phrases like family betrayal and mortgage scandal. Reporters crowded the steps, their breaths steaming in the cold. Priya paced in front of us, checking her phone for updates. She looked up, her eyes fierce. "Are you ready?" she asked me. I took a deep breath. "I've been ready since the day they banned me from Christmas." Daniel reached for my hand. "Whatever happens, we face it together." When we were called inside, the courtroom lights seemed too bright, the hush too loud. Christine sat at the defense table, her once polished hair now a dull tangle, her eyes hollow. She barely looked at me as I took the stand. I told my story, again. The fake documents, the forged signature, the closing I never attended. The betrayal that cleaved a family in two. The weeks I'd spent clawing back my name. Halfway through, I glanced at Christine. For the first time, I saw not a villain but a frightened woman, drowning in her own choices. It didn't soften my resolve. It just made me human. When I stepped down, Daniel rose. His voice broke as he admitted his blindness, his failures. But he spoke of redemption too, of the sister he'd nearly lost, of the brother he hoped to be again. The judge listened, stone-faced. When it was over, she said the words I'd been waiting for. I find sufficient cause for full restitution and punitive damages, and I refer the defendant for sentencing. I let out a breath I'd been holding for months. Daniel turned to me, his face alight with relief. "It's over," he whispered. But I knew better. It was only the beginning. Asterisk. That night, we sat around my small dining table. Daniel, Mama, Priya, my aunt and uncle. We ate tamales and laughed about old memories, new wounds slowly stitching shut. After they left, I stood by the window, watching snow gather on the street below. My phone buzzed. A message from Detective Kane. "Thank you for your courage. You changed more than your own story tonight. Next Tama," I smiled. I thought about the woman I'd been when this began. Small, silenced, pushed out of her own family. I thought about the woman I was now. Not small, not silenced, not a pawn. My name was mine again. My home was mine again. And the next Christmas, no one would ever ban me from my own family's table. Pool. The days after Christine's sentencing felt like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. For weeks, I'd lived with my chest clamped tight, my trust whittled to splinters. Now, Savannah's winter air seemed sweeter. But freedom doesn't erase scars. It just gives them room to heal. The federal case made headlines for weeks. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid me now nodded hello. Former coworkers at Rivers Market slipped me pastries and shy smiles. I became an unintentional symbol, an everyday woman who stood up when everyone else said, "Let it go." I didn't feel like a symbol. I felt exhausted. One evening, Priya and I sat at my kitchen table, half-empty mugs of chai between us. She scrolled through news articles on her phone, the glow painting her face gold. "You know you'll probably be asked to speak at advocacy events, right?" she said, half teasing. I raised an eyebrow. What would I say? "Hi, I'm Marisol Evora, and my brother's wife ruined my life, but I survived?" She chuckled. "That's exactly what you'd say. And they'd listen because you're proof that an ordinary voice can topple a mountain." I sipped my chai, the steam drifting like an exhale from my soul. Maybe. One day. Right now, I just want to breathe. Priya squeezed my hand. "You earned it." Asterisk. Daniel was doing his own penance. He called daily, sometimes just to say nothing at all. He showed up on my doorstep with takeout when I forgot to eat, with flowers when I looked like I hadn't slept. He'd begun therapy, something we both knew he needed. It was a fragile rebuild, but the foundation felt real. One morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox, its envelope crisp and unfamiliar. Inside was a single sheet, an invitation to speak at a community center about financial fraud and family betrayal. I nearly laughed. Priya had jinxed me. When I told Daniel, he lit up. "You have to do it," he urged. "Think how many people you'll help." I hesitated. The wound still throbbed. But the thought of someone else sitting in a small apartment, staring at their name forged on a mortgage they never signed, it was enough. "All right," I said, exhaling. "But you're coming with me." The night of the talk, I stood in a drafty community hall, a microphone trembling in my grip. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of strangers who'd come to hear my story. Daniel sat in the front row, Mama beside him, hands clasped tight. I cleared my throat. "My name is Marisol Evora. You probably know bits and pieces of what happened to me. But what you don't know is this. I almost let silence win." A hush fell. I spoke about the phone call that banned me from Christmas. About the day I found my name on papers I'd never signed. About the courtrooms, the betrayal, the cell doors closing on people who were once my family. But silence didn't win, I said, voice steady now, because I realized something. They didn't steal my voice. I gave it away when I believed I wasn't strong enough to stand alone. A woman in the back dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Another man scribbled notes furiously. I took a breath, words pouring out like water from a broken dam. You don't need to be brave all at once, you just need to take the next step. File the report, call the lawyer, tell someone what they did to you. And when you think you can't do it alone, look around. You're not alone anymore. When I stepped off that makeshift stage, the applause startled me. Daniel hugged me so tightly my ribs protested. I'm proud of you, he whispered. And I promise you, we'll never lose each other again. Asterisk. Weeks passed. I rebuilt my credit score brick by brick. My name came off every document Christine had poisoned. The final check from the settlement arrived. Money I'd used to buy a tiny house in Savannah, one no one could take from me again. On a crisp March afternoon, Daniel helped me carry the last box into my new living room. We stood side by side, looking at the sun slanting through clean windows. It's beautiful, Marisol, he said. You did this. We did, I corrected softly. Mama arrived with her homemade flan, insisting we celebrate. Priya brought wine, and we ate on the floor, toasting to new walls, new memories. And when the first evening breeze rustled through the curtains, I realized the greatest victory wasn't winning a courtroom battle. It was standing here, surrounded by the people who mattered, no longer asking permission to belong. One day, when Christmas came around again, we would sit in this house, Daniel, Mama, Priya, my family, and we'd light candles and pass plates and raise glasses. We'd remember the year my brother's wife banned me from Christmas. But we'd tell it like a legend, a story of survival, a testament that some betrayals may break you, but they do not define you. The day my family sat around my new dining table for Christmas, I realized the story I'd lived had not been about betrayal alone. It was about what comes after, the kind of fragile, stubborn hope that clings to the smallest sliver of light when the darkness threatens to drown it. The house smelled of cinnamon and fresh pine, garlands draped over the mantel, tiny candles flickering like promises kept. Mama fussed in the kitchen, stirring pots of hot chocolate so rich you could feel it coat your ribs. Daniel balanced a tray of gingerbread cookies, his laughter echoing against the walls that had never known secrets. Priya and I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, wrapping last-minute gifts. She nudged me with her elbow, grinning. Think about it. A year ago you were alone in an empty apartment, banned from Christmas. And look at you now. I tied a bow with trembling hands. I almost gave up, Priya. I almost believed them. That I didn't deserve this. She shook her head, eyes fierce. You fought. You changed the ending. Not just for you. For everyone who watched you refused to be silent. In the corner, Mama lit a small candle and whispered a prayer for forgiveness. For all of us. Not just for the ones who broke the circle. And I found that I, too, could let go of the bitterness I'd carried like a shield. When we gathered at the table, passing plates of tamales and warm bread, Daniel stood to make a toast. His hand trembled as he raised his glass. To my sister, he said, for saving us when we didn't know we needed saving, for fighting for her name, and for mine, for proving that family isn't perfect, but it's worth fighting for. Tears welled up, but they were warm this time, not sharp and heavy like before. We clinked glasses, the room filled with laughter that sounded like healing. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the last gift unwrapped, I slipped outside onto my porch. The night was cold but calm, snow drifting down in lazy spirals. I hugged my coat tighter around my shoulders, looking up at the winter sky. No shadows lurked there now, only stars. Daniel joined me, leaning against the railing. Remember that first Christmas, when you were banned? I snorted. Hard to forget. He nudged me gently. I was so blind, Marisol. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself. I turned to him, my breath misting between us. Maybe that's the point. Some mistakes don't get forgiven, they get carried. And maybe that's how we remember to do better. He pulled me into a hug, and for the first time in years, I let myself believe it would hold. Back inside, Mama was stringing new ornaments on the tree, tiny wooden birds, each painted with a single word: hope, truth, family. They swung gently in the glow of the fairy lights, a testament to what we'd built when everything else was torn down. I curled up on my sofa, Daniel snoring softly beside me, Priya dozing with her head on Mama's shoulder. I felt the cracks inside me, still there, but no longer gaping wounds. Just reminders that I'd survived. Tomorrow would bring its own storms. There would be papers to sign, interviews to give, neighbors to reassure. But tonight the house was warm, the circle was unbroken. And when the clock struck midnight, I whispered to the shadows that no longer scared me. You don't get to ban me anymore. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.